great to see you all out this morning. Good to be back and talking about our series of dealing with life's problems. And I kind of get our minds in the right place. I want to tell you a story about a guy who went into a jewelry store to buy something really nice for his wife. And he went in there and he's looking around and he's not really finding anything he just loves yet. So he goes up to the person behind the desk and she says, "Listen, I've got just the thing you need." And so she goes to the back and pulls out this ring, and it looks kind of funny, and she says, "This is a mood ring." She says, "This is all you're ever going to need." I don't know if y'all remember the mood rings that tell you what color you are, what you feel like. And she said, "This one is rare. It's guaranteed to always work." And so he thinks, all my problems are solved, to be able to tell. So he goes and he takes the mood ring home. And to his surprise, it worked just like it was advertised. So every time she was in a good mood, the ring would turn green. And every time she was in a bad mood, it would leave a red mark on his forehead. So, it worked, but at what expense? This morning we're talking about the problem of anger. And this is one of those things where as we get into these topics, as we look at earthly problems and dealing with biblical solutions to those problems, we will find out that a lot of these hit very close to home. And one of the great things about the Bible, and I've mentioned it to you in the last few lessons we've done, so far we've looked at things like forgiveness, we've looked at bitterness, we've looked at worry, we've looked at things that plague our lives. And the thing about the Bible that I love so much about being able to look at these hard topics is the realization that we have a solution to these problems. And I've mentioned it to you in the past, that one of my very least favorite things by a lot is whenever you hear somebody just describe a problem in great detail without giving a solution. And anger is a lot of times like that. We can talk for, I don't know how many hours we can talk about the problems that anger causes and the issues that are there with it. But very rarely do you hear a solution given to the problem of anger. And I want to mention that as we talk about these things, realize that these always hit very close to home for not just me, or for not just you, but for me as well. This is a preaching to a mirror. And so all of these things are problems that we struggle with. And whenever I think about the problem of anger, here's what we realize. We have people that are here with us today, or perhaps somebody we know that's very close to us, that live a life that is filled with anger. And it may not be that person, or it may not be that you that has an anger problem, but you live in a house that's filled with anger. You feel these problems because of the anger that is around you. You feel it and you live with the silence, or you live with the look. You live in a house that is filled with anger and the problems that it plagues us with and the problems that cause the explosion that happens on a random Tuesday night during the week. The problems that come from issues like this, the problem of living with that. And one of the things that I have noticed is, as I've been around people and noticing my own problems, very rarely do we ever admit to having any issues with anger. Very seldom do we ever come out and say, well, yes, I'm an angry person, or yes, I struggle with anger. A lot of times there's almost a pass given to it. The attitude will say, no, I'm honest, or no, I'm just passionate, or no, maybe that when people are around me, they know exactly what to expect. And we kind of maybe disguise anger as almost these ideas of not playing games or one of these other things. And so we never really address that true problem of anger. But I want you to grab your Bibles out with me and go to Proverbs chapter 14. And I want you to look at this passage, namely in verse number 29, and let's read about the two men in that verse. Proverbs chapter 14, verse number 29. And if you're that person, you're around that person, that they tell you that they're just passionate or honest, or there's no playing games with them, a lot of times we're conditioned to agree. We nod along because we don't want to be the next target. We don't want to be the next victim, but maybe we're that person today that struggles with anger. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse number 29, whenever we read this text, it says, "He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth fall." Now I want you to think about the two men in that verse for a second with me. The first man is slow, and he feels it. He feels it coming. He knows he's getting upset, but he waits. Now, the second guy in this story, and the second guy in this verse, he talks about him being hasty. He is very quick. We would call him today somebody who's short-fused. Somebody who very quickly can just go up and explode at a moment's notice. He's quick, it says there, and has that hasty of spirit. And it says at the end of that verse that the quick man exalted folly. That's what the King James says. And what that means is he lifts up his foolishness on display. He lifts it up and the whole world sees his foolishness. He puts it on display. Now, the most interesting part of this morning's lesson is today we're talking about the problem about anger. But really, it's not necessarily the problem of anger in and of itself. It's what lies beneath it. It is what causes it to come out. And so as we read this verse and think about these two men, anger is not usually the problem. It is a symptom. It is the alarm that is telling us that there is something deeper going on. And so as we think about these two men and we think about where their anger is coming from, where their anger is coming to, when we can find out where it's really coming from, then we can deal with it and we can find a solution. And once again, I'm not preaching this from the outside. This lesson is for all of us, and all of us as we go through life. We live in a world that rewards us for being angry, for being quick-tempered, for being maybe passionate, as it would call us. And very seldom are we rewarded for being slow to wrath. And so we're going to talk through three things today. We're going to talk about what's really going on when I get angry. We're going to talk about what my anger actually does to the people around me. And then we're going to talk about the final thing, which is the only thing that actually fixes the problem of anger. So I want you to look first with me, keeping your verse or keeping your thumb there in Proverbs, but then I want you to turn over for a second to James chapter 4. Let's begin by looking at what's really going on. What's really going on when I get angry? Now, I mentioned to you a second ago that anger is more of a symptom. It's more of an alarm than the actual problem. The reason for that is because, and let's ask this question, is anger in and of itself a sinful thing? Is the emotion or the mood of anger a sinful thing? No, it's not. Matter of fact, has God been angry? Absolutely. Does God get angry? Absolutely. We call that righteous anger. In Mark chapter 3, it talks about Jesus looking around, and it says he looked around with anger. He was upset at what was happening. That's what we call righteous anger. There is such a thing as righteous anger, but let's be very honest with ourselves. Most of the anger that we experience in our life, how often does it really have to do with God's holiness? How often does it really have to do with righteous anger? And how often does it actually have to do with maybe our plans being interrupted, or maybe our comfort being disturbed, or maybe our expectations not being met? That's typically where anger comes from. Very seldom do we have or experience righteous anger. Now, I'm not saying we can't. We absolutely can. But whenever we're angry, ask yourself, what is it for? What am I angry about? There is a quiet path that anger takes in the heart. And what we can call it is anger becoming a ledger. It keeps a ledger. That means it keeps a record. And it keeps a record of wrongs. A ledger is that book that you keep records in. And whenever you think about what being angry is, you think about the ledger that it keeps, because usually it goes like this. It starts with, I want something. And then it may go to that thing that I want becoming a need. And then that thing evolves from being a need to that need becoming a right that I want. And then before we know it, that right becomes a demand. And when that demand happens, then I have to have it. And anger shows up like a debt collector pounding on the door. Because we've kept a ledger, we've kept a record of what I think I am owed or what I think I actually want and need. And that has boiled over to me exploding and experiencing anger and lashing it out on those people that are around me. Now, what I mean by that is in James chapter 4 and verse number 1, anger is what happens when my desire with what I want becomes a demand. In James 4:1, he explains this, from whence come wars and fighting among you? Come they not hence even of your lust that war in your members? Now, I want you to stop at the end of verse number 1 and ask yourself, where do fights come from? He says in verse number 1 at the beginning, from whence do these wars and fightings among you? He says at the end, do they not come from your lust that war in your members? He says, do they not come from the desires that are inside you? Do they not come from the heart? Yes, we may see anger. Anger is a symptom of something deeper that is going on. And so what's really going on when I get angry? I haven't gotten my way, or maybe I've been pushed too far. Maybe my plan has been interrupted. Whatever it is, I'm lashing out and I'm remembering that ledger of that thing that I think I was owed for. And it's causing me to spill over the edge. And so the first question is not necessarily of who made me mad. It is, what do I want so badly right now that I'm willing to sin to get it? What is causing me to boil over my edge? What is this issue that I'm facing? Or what do I think that I am owed to the point that I'm going to spill over in anger and lash out to those people that are around me? What is that want that has gone to the demand in our mind? What are we desiring that has spilled its way over? And maybe it's something like respect. Maybe it's something like control. That I want control, I need control, I deserve control, and I demand it. And if I don't get it, that's when my anger shows up. Maybe you're one that all you want is silence. Whenever you don't get silence, what happens? Maybe then that anger spills out, because wanting silence may become a need, that may become something we deserve, or maybe it's something as simple as appreciation. Want appreciation, it turns into me demanding appreciation, and when I don't get it, then I become angry. Or maybe it's even something as simple as cooperation. We want somebody to get along with us, and when that does not happen, it spills over all the way to now this anger is out of control. Remember that guy in Proverbs that we talked about, that is hasty, the one that rushes to be quick to anger. See, he goes from I want to I demand in a split second, and he goes there and he arrives at that conclusion and it explodes. And there is anger seen all over the place. Now, none of those desires we're talking about are wrong in and of themselves. It's not wrong to want cooperation or silence or appreciation. But the problem becomes whenever I put those things above everything else. And I start thinking that I deserve all of these things. I demand all of these things. And if I don't get them, I'll become this angry person that rushes into anger. Whenever I become that in that moment, I've decided how things should go, how people owe me, what I'm owed, and then what the consequence will be. I've made myself and put myself up on the throne, and if I don't get my way, I'm going to finish it off with anger. And that passion and honesty that we might guise ourselves as is our way of getting back at them. It's our way of showing them who's boss. It's our way of dealing with these problems. And then the problem with the heart, as we talked about a second ago, is it starts keeping records. And it starts to keep that ledger. And all of a sudden, we start remembering, well, they actually owe me. Or they didn't give me this, or I remember this that they did for me. It remembers what I think I'm owed. And anger keeps that record, and it keeps it filed away. Now, here's what I also understand. That some of you didn't learn about anger from the preacher talking about it on a random Sunday morning in March. Some of you have lived with anger for a long time. And you are accustomed to anger because you had to live with it in your household. You saw anger, maybe it was a family member, or somebody that you love, but you learned it not in an auditorium, you learned it in the living room. And maybe whenever you watched it, you absorbed it. And you learned what it's like to be angry, and maybe you're finding yourself struggling with that same exact thing that you may have seen and developed with your own self. I want you to look at a passage with me back in Proverbs, and go to Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 11, because if that's you, and if you or someone you love has gone through this, lived a life of this, lived in a house like this, Proverbs 19 verse 11 says, "The discretion of a man deferreth his anger, and it is his glory to pass over a transgression." What he's saying there, it is his glory to pass over an offense. You are not a strong individual if you fly off the handle and become angry. If you're quick to anger. What he's saying there in Proverbs chapter 19, his glory, his strength, is having his emotions under control. Having his mind and heart under control so that when a problem comes, he lets it pass over. He does not lash out. It is his glory to pass over an offense. It is his strength to let it go. That's not weakness. The weak man is going to lash out and be quick to anger. He's going to lash out and let people know what his mind is. The one who is strong is the one who handles it. The one who controls it. Now, it's not saying there to not be truthful, but it is saying to not let anger rule what you're about to do next. It's not saying let anger rule from your heart. When anger shows up, don't just suppress it. Ask yourself, what is actually the problem here? What has gone from that want to that demand that I have that is allowing me to turn into somebody that I don't want to be? Because the tragedy of anger is that it doesn't just affect us. The tragedy of anger is what my anger actually produces for those people that are around me. You see, the real problem and the real subtle issue of anger is it never just affects me and you. What does it affect? Whenever we read earlier in Proverbs, whenever you think about the two people, the guy that was the foolish one, it says he exalts folly because he's quick to anger. He exalts it. He lifts it up, and he puts it on a banner for everybody to see. It affects everybody that's around him. So stop for a second and think about this. Where does anger go? Anger doesn't stay within us. If we show anger, anger is something that goes public. It sets the climate. It sets the temperature of the room. Now, I want you to picture something with me. And it's a normal evening after work. And you're a guy who has just pulled into the driveway. And it's been a long day. A long day. And you're frustrated. You had problems. They're not even your fault. They're not even your fault. And you walk in, and your kids are loud, rowdy. And your wife is busy in the kitchen, and she's cooking. And you walk in after this long day, and she asks a simple question about what you're doing on that weekend, and all of a sudden, you don't yell, you just sigh and clench your jaw. Now, when we think about anger, over-the-top anger, you may look at that and say, well, that's not really anger. He's dealing with a problem. But the house recalibrates to that temperature. And what it means by that is that you are controlling the temperature of our house, because then maybe the wife stops talking, maybe the TV gets turned down, maybe the kids stop talking, but they all know that Dad's in a mood. He's having this problem, and so what do? Do we go poke the bear? No, we probably avoid him. Let him have his time. But what we don't realize is that even then, even when we say, well, I didn't do anything, I didn't go and show anger like that. But even like that, the subtlety of taking that out on the people that are around us, of changing that temperature in the room, of having people that we love treat us differently because of the moods that we're in, is a person there that exalts folly. And I love all of you to death. That's why the reality is some of us don't just carry around moods, we carry around files. And we remember, and we're ready at all times to get into that record book whenever something bad happens or when somebody wrongs us again, and we dig it up. And we remember what was said 3 months ago. We remember what happened last Thanksgiving. We remember every unresolved offense, and we're ready to lash out. You see, that's what anger produces. It produces this record book in our mind that is filled with this idea of being ready for these problems. And whenever conflict comes, very seldom do we ever deal with the problem. We throw the whole record book at it, and we're just going back to square one again. It's you always, or you never, whatever it is, and we're back to square one again. That's not remembering, that's prosecuting. What does anger produce in our life that is something good? I want you to look at Proverbs chapter 15, verse number 1. And I'll tell you what Scripture tells us that anger produces. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse number 1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. So what does it mean whenever we give a soft answer? You think, and we may say this in passing, but the reality is our tone matters, doesn't it? The way we say things, the way we act matters greatly. Our tone, giving a soft answer. Here's that man again that is slow to wrath. He is taking this in. He is letting himself not be controlled by his anger. You want to know what anger is? Ecclesiastes 7, verse number 9. And if anybody has a degree of writing about it, it's probably Solomon. Ecclesiastes 7:9, he simply says this. He says, anger rests in the bosom of fools. And what he means by that is anger settles in and it becomes an identity. It becomes who we are. We are the angry man now. We are known for that anger. We are known for lashing out. We are known for maybe pushing those people around us away because we are one that cannot control ourselves. And that's what the problem with anger. It settles in. He says it's in the bosom of fools. It is your identity. It's in your belly. It's in your deepest part. It has become you if we do not get it under control. And then back to Proverbs 29, verse number 11. And one of the best verses that would all do us well, if we were to have something we could look at every morning when we got up. If you're needing a verse to put on your mirror as you get up in the morning, do Proverbs 29, verse number 11. And it says here, a fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in till afterwards. if we could just be slow to our response, slow to it, and have self-control, imagine what the people around us would be like. Now, if we are the one that walks in and the temperature of the room changes because of our presence, that people change how they're acting when we walk in, it's one of those things where it's probably not everybody else's fault. It's probably me at that point. But if that temperature changes, here's a question for us that has to be asked. And all I ask is that we all ask ourselves it honestly. And that is, who in your house has learned to walk on eggshells because of you? Who has learned that they can't tell you the truth? Who has learned that they have to be careful about what is said because of fear of your mood changing, self-control erupting, and anger being shown again? If our homes have to manage our moods, that is not a strength. That is not something to be proud of. It is, as we talk about in Proverbs, folly on display. It is lifting it up and showing just how fully it is. The worst part that we sometimes don't realize with anger is that your anger is not just your business. Our anger shapes the people who are closest to us. And usually the people that mean the most to us are the ones that are affected most by our inability to control ourselves. Now I want you to think about this and think about the only thing that actually fixes it. Now we're going to run out of time before we go through all this, but I do want to leave you with a few things here to think about. I want you to open up your Bibles to Colossians chapter 2 and look at verse number 14 with me. Colossians chapter 2, verse number 14. Now here's the reality when it comes to anger. You can manage anger. You can count its end, and that's a good practice to have, to calm yourself down. You can walk away, but where do we really have to diagnose the problem at? The problem comes from the heart. The real issue is what we believe we're owed. The real issue is, remember, that want going into a demand, but the gospel starts somewhere else. Matter of fact, the gospel says, well, here you are keeping records. And here you are keeping that ledger of wrongs, but it's reminding us, well, you had a ledger kept on you too, you remember? And you had a record book on you, and it was not small. And Colossians 2, verse number 14 says, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. Whenever you think about that beginning, that handwriting of ordinances, now in a way, we think about what that means of that record, that debt, that handwriting of ordinances that was against us. That record, that ledger, and what does he say about it? Does he say it's still there? If we are one who are Christians, he says he blotted it out, nailing it to his cross, and all of a sudden that debt is now canceled. That debt is gone. And so the question for you and I is that the Christian life is not about you and I proving that we deserve better treatment or getting what we want. It's about living like somebody who has already received mercy and now passing it on to others. It's about remembering what was given up for you and I. It's like showing mercy because you and I were shown mercy. And imagine if you and I had to be held accountable for that ledger, that thing there that all of us had against us. Imagine where we would be then. But you see, if God treated us better than we deserved, which we know to be a fact, then what right do we have on insisting to treat everybody exactly as we think they deserve? Because usually that's where we go, is that they deserve it. Well, you and I deserve much worse too. But how are we going to act and how are we going to treat those people? And so if we read and remember what God tells us to do about anger, we're going to talk about it specifically tonight on the way to find and diagnose that problem with anger, what to do to remove it. But remember, it starts here. It starts with the realization that if I go out and I act like I am owed these things, then how can God act to us when he is so owed so much more by you and I? So, leave you with one final verse, and I encourage you to come back tonight because we're going to talk about the problem with anger and how to solve the problem of anger biblically. But I want you to leave you with the verse in James chapter 1 and verse number 19, where it says, swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. There's things that it's very good to be fast at. But there's things that are very good to be slow at. And speaking and anger are two very good things to find ourselves slow at. So if we were to ask ourselves, going all the way back up and considering that text in Proverbs 14, verse 29, there's two men there. In Proverbs 14:29, it says, "He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly." This morning, which one are you? Which man are you? Are you the one that is slow, that feels it building up with weights and addresses the problem, or maybe the one who is quick, short-fused? If you're that man short-fused, or even if you're one that has anger and is slow to it, come back tonight, we'll talk about what we can do biblically to deal with this problem of anger, to talk about the issues underneath it that we really need to address, and really to look at our heart. But if you're here this morning, and one of the things we mentioned as we've gone through this series of handling life's problems, the very first way of handling life's problems is in becoming a Christian, is in obeying the gospel and first becoming a follower of God. You see, we can only handle these problems of life if we follow God first. And so the first question for us is, am I a Christian? Have I been obedient to the gospel? This morning, if you haven't been, that's what we're here for, and the invitation is open and offered. If you're a Christian and this maybe hits a little too close to home, and you're one that's struggling, and you need help, you need encouragement, maybe you've done something publicly, you need prayers at the church, that's what we're here for as well. And I encourage all of us, if you have the opportunity to come back tonight, because we're going to talk about the solution to this. It's not Hank's solution. What does the Word say for us to do to get rid of it once and for all in our lives? But this morning, the invitation is open. If we can help you in any way, please come forward and together we stand and sing this song of encouragement.